Hungry Heart is the 14th episode of the 8th season of Frasier. This is directed by Kelsey Grammer, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. And for me, this is definitely an episode of two halves. The story with Kenny, I really thoroughly enjoyed. The story with Daphne, not so much, but there are some good moments with Daphne, so I didn't hate it. But I'll talk more about that when we get there. It starts off with Frasier and Martin discussing Daphne's eating, and then Niles comes over and Frasier brings it up with him, and he is just oblivious to Daphne's eating, to her weight gain. If you're unaware, the reason for this is that Jane Leeves is actually pregnant, so obviously while she's wearing a lot of baggy clothing, but also to try and mask any weight gain that is visible, then they're saying that she's eaten a lot, and they expand on this more in a little bit. But I don't like it. There were many other things they could have done, and I think it's uncomfortable, but maybe we can say it's raising an important topic, but I do think it did it in a way that maybe wasn't as sensitive as it could have been. Kenny then comes over, and he is married, but he has a date with a woman called Janis, and he gave Janis his home phone number. So Frasier agrees to go to the restaurant where Kenny is meant to meet Janis to tell Janis that it's not going to happen. But before he gets there, we see Kenny's wife talking with Janis, because she found out, of course, because she phoned the home phone number. And one thing leads to another. Frasier arrives, thinks that Kenny's wife is Janis, and they end up making a date. Also, she is just known as Kenny's wife. I don't know if we ever find out her name, but certainly she's credited as Kenny's wife. And then we cut back to the apartment. Daphne and Niles are there with a giant gold-wrapped swan. And then, this is the bit that I don't like. Daphne is on the floor after stepping on Eddie's toy. Niles is unable to help her up. Martin then comes in and panics, thinking she's fallen on Eddie, but then Eddie comes out and we get an Eddie appearance, which is always a highlight. But what I really find frustrating here is that she's not that big. She can absolutely get up on her own. Now, I don't know if she were actually pregnant, if the character were pregnant, she might need help. I know that it can shift your centre of gravity, but that's not what's happening with Daphne. She hasn't gained that much weight. She absolutely can get up on her own. So I find it to be really frustrating and honestly in really poor taste. So I don't love it, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. Some of the dialogue here is pretty good though. And then, as much as I don't like these jokes, I do like the moment when Martin said, because Martin, Niles and Frasier end up helping her up, and Martin says, "It took 3 cranes to lift you." It's insensitive, but the reason I like that moment is because Martin is so happy with his own joke. It is such a joy to see because he's just so happy with it. So I rather like that. Kenny then comes over and Frasier asks Kenny if it's okay if he dates Janis. And there's obviously some suspense there about what will happen if somebody finds out, who's going to find out first that Janis isn't Janis. And then we see Daphne eating some chocolate hidden in the bookshelf, and then Kenny says, "I think my wife's having an affair." And of course, we the viewer have a much clearer picture of what's going on than any of the characters. Frasier then tells Kenny to hide in his bedroom because Janis is coming over, and obviously it would be really awkward if Kenny saw her. And when Frasier answers the door to the fake Janis, he 100% calls her Janet. I watched it a few times, I slowed it down. He definitely says Janet. I know it's just a slip of the tongue, but I feel like they should have caught that. Frasier then goes back to the bedroom to check on Kenny. Kenny shows Frasier some pictures of his wife. And that's when he realises that the woman in his apartment is not Janis, it's Kenny's wife. Roz then comes over with a cookbook for Daphne, and then Frasier confronts the fake Janis. And she explains that she decided to do this not because she was attracted to Frasier, but because it was for revenge against Kenny. And Frasier's reaction to her blunt delivery is brief, but I rather enjoyed it. There was a kind of brief pause of defeat from Frasier, which I found to be quite amusing. And then Kenny comes into the main room and sees his wife's purse, and Frasier has to pretend it's Roz's purse. He kisses her, then shoves her back into the toilet. Roz is confused. Her reaction to everything was brilliant. It's a really beautiful, funny, well-executed moment. Roz is absolutely clueless of what's going on. We then get some more remarks about Daphne hiding food. And she then ultimately agrees to go to a spa. And I do think that this bit is quite important. I think the build-up over the last few episodes has been very insensitive and, in my opinion, not the right approach. But for Daphne to finally realise that maybe she does have a problem, maybe there is something that's causing her to overeat, and to then take action against that and go and get some kind of help. I don't think a spa is necessarily, I know they're not talking about like a mud pack and facial spa, but a health spa, a health clinic. But I still think that, Frasier being a psychiatrist, I think maybe he should have lent a little bit more heavily into seeking professional medical help rather than making it sound a little bit more fancy and calling it a spa. Again, you can get that help at a spa, but I don't think that's quite the right approach here. But the most important thing here is that Daphne agreed to go and get the help and agreed to talk about her feelings, and I think that that's raising awareness and doing a really good thing. So I really, really hate the build-up. Again, I understand why they did it, but at the same time, I don't agree with it. But ultimately, having Daphne realize these things, admit these things out loud, and start to talk about things, that is a really positive thing that the episode is doing. So I have mixed feelings. I don't love it. I still ultimately wish that they took a different direction, but at the same time, there were things that I do think worked reasonably well in this episode at the end with Daphne there. So it is what it is. I don't love it, but it's fine. And then Roz ends up leaving in a panic. It's a decent episode. The story with Kenny, I loved. I thought it played out brilliantly. Daphne, not so much, but I'm glad that we finally got to a point. I'm glad we got to a point where I can talk about it more, because I knew this was coming and I know what happens next, but I was never really able to say too much about it or really express why I didn't like this or where they were going with it. But I can see they had good intentions. But some of the jokes leading up to this moment I don't love. But Martin's delight at his crane joke, I do like. Ultimately, Hungry Heart ends up being a decent episode of Frasier.